So welcome back and to part 2 of this series, Beyond the Limen. Thank you for being here. I think you're making a great choice starting this practice of active imagination. So following on from the previous session where we simply greeted our soul, we're now going to be moving on, getting a bit more intellectual and becoming very precise about what it is we're doing here and what we actually mean by active imagination. In our first session, we just got stuck into practice pretty much. But I'm very conscious that in the past, when I've released content about active imagination, people have said to me, what is active imagination? I don't actually know what it is. Well, there is a definition, kinda. There aren't any universally agreed upon definitions, but there is one that I like and I think works. Because what we're doing here is a very unique practice. It's a natural thing. The imagination is the human state, as William Blake said, and the mutual engagement with it, the two-way interaction with the unconscious mind. This is not a new thing, but it is something that is sorely missing from a large part of our modern culture, and it is something that Carl Jung rediscovered. There's always been people doing it at all points in time, but as a therapeutic practice and as a tool for developing self-knowledge, it was Carl Jung who rediscovered it for that purpose and coined the phrase active imagination. Many of you will have tried Eastern meditation, and I do recommend that you do that. It's a very powerful complementary practice to this one. Many of you may have done hypnosis. Many of you may do visualization. But active imagination is different from all of those things. So let's jump straight to a definition. So I like the definition by Jungian analyst Ken James. And he said that active imagination is the intentional engagement with unconscious material for the purposes of deepening a relationship with that material, enhancing both our emotional and intellectual connection with the unconscious material, and ultimately for deepening our relationship with the unconscious itself. So a number of key points to draw from this. The first thing is that this is deliberate. It's something we're doing consciously. That differentiates it from dreaming and also from passive fantasy or daydreaming, where we're just getting caught up in tantalizing thoughts and we're not really in control of what's going on in our mind. We're not controlling active imagination either. We're setting the conditions for the process, but we're not trying to control the unconscious. We are nonetheless pursuing it deliberately and engaging in this two-way interaction. Now that's really key. So that differentiates it from hypnosis and from visualization. Visualization is interesting because it's still a way of gaining an insight into the unconscious mind. You can still see what's in your mind through visualization, but it doesn't have the same transformative quality because there isn't that transformation where you both get to change. So you get to ask questions, it gets to ask questions of you, or it gets to tell you things, and you can physically interact or imagine yourself physically interacting with the unconscious material, and you can have a conversation with it. So it's quite different from merely visualizing. And that's important because key to becoming who we are really capable of being is to bring on board the unconscious mind. It's to, well, as Jung said, divest the self of the false trappings of the persona and the lure of primordial images, i.e. the archetypes of the collective unconscious. So to that end, there's an interaction that goes on, perhaps a negotiation, but ideally a reconciliation, because our challenges, the challenges we encounter in the world, these are by and large reflections of inner conflicts that exist within us. So there's a mutual transformation that has to occur. We have to bring on board the wisdom of the unconscious because it contains the seeds of our development. If we are just trying to superimpose the ego's will onto the unconscious mind, it will resist because the ego has its own ideas, perhaps, if it hasn't gone through this process, if it hasn't, in James's words, deepened the relationship with the unconscious. Well, consciously, we might think that we know what's best for us. But what we want and what we need aren't often the same thing. Rarely are they the same thing. at least prior to this limen of individuation and the whole pursuit of shadow work. And the seeds and the template of what we really need, it's all concealed there in the unconscious. As long as we deny that, it's going to create resistance. It's going to create tension in our lives. So there has to be this two-way interaction. So Ken James goes on, enhancing both our emotional and intellectual connection with the material. Because to truly know a thing, you have to know it both intellectually and emotionally. Just using one of those functions doesn't give you the full picture of what something really is. So to truly get to know our unconscious, there has to be this synthesis of the emotional and the intellectual connection with it. But he doesn't differentiate here between those two elements that Jung pinpointed around divesting the self of the false trappings of the persona. That's essentially shadow work. But also freeing it from the lure of primordial images on the other hand. And that's key because the former relates to the personal unconscious, largely, and the latter pertains to the collective unconscious. And the thing with the collective unconscious, which contains the archetypes, the shadow, by the way, is an archetype, but it's also personal content that we find difficult to confront in ourselves. So that's a sort of exception. But when we talk about the anima, the animus, the hero, the mother, the lover, these are archetypes. These are ancient primordial patterns and images which are shared by the entire human race. Well, it's not possible really to become fully conscious of an archetype. So you might often hear people talking about integrating an archetype, but it's generally not accurate to describe it that way because we may integrate parts of it, but great swathes of it will remain in the unconscious. It's not possible for an ego to fully assimilate an entire archetype. I mean, it can become inflated by an archetype, but not integrating an entire archetype. So then, what to do? Well, what we do is we cultivate a relationship with that archetype. We come to relate to it more positively, and it will relate to us more positively as well. Don't try and make it a certain way. Don't let it abuse you, but neither try to control it or be aggressive towards it. Even if it appears as something very malevolent, you don't want to try and defeat it. You want to reconcile with it. Very different. And lastly here, Ken James talks about ultimately deepening our relationship with the unconscious itself. So I think of this as the meta lesson of coming to understand the unconscious itself from a higher perspective, understand what it is we're doing here. This is a lesson that the ego does well to take on board because it acts as a kind of catalyst for the entire process. It's an intellectual realization on one level, but it puts everything we experience then in perspective if we can see it as that. If we understand that, for one, there are great swathes of psychic material that we don't immediately have access to. They exist in the unconscious mind, and they contain a lot of wisdom. They contain the seeds of our development. And it puts the conscious mind in perspective. It puts it in its place. Not in a lowly place. It's actually quite an exalted place, but it's also a place of humility where it says, okay, I'm here to facilitate this process. And the way the conscious mind perceives things, say in the world, or the way I perceive another person, or until you do this inner work, and even then, we can only see the way our mind renders things. So I find that to be a pretty useful definition. If you're not sure whether something is or isn't active imagination, come back to this and that will tell you. Okay, so moving on to the next slide here. Now to a quote from Jung from The Transcendent Function, written in 1916. He said, "Why cannot the unconscious be left to its own devices? Those who have not already had a few bad experiences in this respect will naturally see no reason to control the unconscious. But anyone with sufficiently bad experience will eagerly welcome the possibility of doing so, the bare possibility of doing so." So, clearly he doesn't literally mean to control the unconscious. He means to become conscious of the facts and features that are creating conflict in the mind. But what I like about this quote is it feeds in very much to the topic of today's session, and this is about the opportunity for self-inquiry. the idea that we already have the answers somewhere in us. It's often a question of just getting a little bit creative. Firstly, having the will and the responsibility. And that responsibility comes as a result of, in some sense, understanding the unconscious mind. But then getting creative and saying, well, whatever I have going on, I can find an answer. I can figure it out. And there's many tools for doing that. Active imagination is a key one. It's a particularly useful one. But what then to do about that? What should I do in my active imaginations? Well, one answer is to simply get good at asking really good questions. So, as an example on this next page here, say you've got some curious pain, like a chronic pain that's not going away, or just overwhelming emotion. Maybe every day at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you just feel like you want to go to sleep. You think, oh, I'm sleeping fine at night. Why am I getting this afternoon stump? What is this about? Well, maybe there's something in you that's calling for attention. And maybe you can go into your imagination and speak to that part of you that is calling for your attention. Understand why it is this is happening. And this can be any number of things, any kind of emotion, any kind of desire or inclination. You can, as I've listed here, ask, what is this feeling trying to tell me? So something very specific. You can actually engage with a personification of a physical feeling or an emotion. You can ask slightly broader questions like, where am I imbalanced in my pursuit of selfhood? So it's likely that on some level you already know the answer to these things, but there's so many layers of other things there, and maybe the conscious mind is focused on other things that it needs to be focused on. But left unattended, these aspects of yourself calling for your attention will make themselves known. And so in some places, people like Jung, people like Robert Johnson, they talk about active imagination as a tool for releasing that subconscious content in a safer way, the content that's just below the surface of conscious awareness. However, we don't merely have to use it in this responsive way to what's right there and what's showing up. We can also use it in a very proactive way to gain deep, deep insight into the very nature of ourselves. So here I've listed, what does my shadow consist of? So we can dig really deep. We need not wait for something to be bubbling just under the surface. And honestly, it's a good idea to do both. So in terms of how you structure it, we're going to be talking about that in the later part here, but just know that you can do this both in response and also proactively, and a combination of both is particularly useful. Lastly, I've got, how am I being perceived? So say in a particular situation, it's not so much here about trying to reverse engineer a perception, the one that we're comfortable with, like a persona self-image, so much as it's about understanding where we might have become misaligned, what our impact might be on other people. Some of you may well have had an experience like this, where suddenly you have an insight and you realize that not only are you being perceived a certain way, and you had no idea, but perhaps justifiably, perhaps you did something that was inconsiderate, maybe even unethical. Maybe you were serving power as opposed to serving love. So active imagination is one tool for diving deep into that. So it's about time we moved on and did a guided exercise here. But before we do that, I'd just like you to take a little bit of time and think about a kind of question you might like to ask yourself in this exercise. So we're going to be, in this exercise, meeting the sage archetype. So it's a well-known archetype, a wise person, usually a wise old person, can be male, can be female, someone who's lived a long time, has the answers. Well, this is a part of you too. So you can go into your mind and you can ask the sage any question at any time, within reason. So just give that some thought. I'm actually reminded of an Alan Watts piece here where he says, if you had one question to ask God, what would you ask? And perhaps you should ask, what kind of question should I ask? So if you're not sure what else to ask, you're welcome to try that. The good news here is that you can always come back into this place and do it again. So with that said, just taking a position, Starting in the same way. Suggest you do this seated or lying down. Close your eyes. So in the usual way, we just let the mind settle in. There isn't really anything to do here exactly. A bit of patience helps. Just notice what state your mind is in. Do you feel immediately very calm? Or is it bouncing around, full of thoughts? Either way, notice that you don't control the state of your mind. You can influence it. You can receive it. But the fact that we don't fully control it is just more potential insights into the nature and composition of mind. So just bring your attention to the breath. Just going to take a minute or two to settle the mind, open the aperture. So see if you can fix the attention on the sensation of the breath. Don't worry if the mind wanders. But each time you notice it has, just bring your attention back to whatever it is you're doing. And now, release the attention on the breath. And bring your mind to the imagination. And imagine yourself in a place where you feel the sage archetype might reside. So just allow this place to form naturally. It can be an indoor space or outdoor. I recommend not using the family homes, but you could use an old building that you know, or a forest, or some kind of mountain cabin. Just take a couple more moments to check this place out. Notice its various details. Any symbolic features. You can even reach out and touch something. And notice how you feel in this place. And now, in this place, a figure begins to form. This is the sage. A representative of your own higher wisdom. If a real living person should appear, just politely ask them to change form into something more symbolic. Examine them more closely. Notice their clothing, their demeanor, their stance, any expression they may hold. All of this is giving you valuable information into your relationship with the sage archetype. And now introduce yourself to the sage. You can do this in words, or physically, perhaps shaking hands or hugging. And notice how the sage responds. You might even wish to ask the sage's name. And now, the sage is ready to help you with your question. So bring to mind your question from earlier. And when you're ready, just pose it to the sage. And see how they respond. They might respond with words or actions. Just allow it to unfold naturally. You can try asking the question a couple of times. But just be open to receiving the sage's response, whatever it is. And having asked your question and received the sage's response, take the next minute or two just to engage in a free-form interaction with the sage. You can continue to ask follow-up questions, or just have a conversation, or even just spend some time together. Use this time to deepen your relationship with this archetype. So just thanking the sage for now. Saying goodbye. And just allowing the scene to fade. Just gradually bringing your attention back to the space around you. and opening your eyes again in your own time. So that was the first time we've done much significant two-way interaction in the exercise. That's a pretty important cornerstone of active imagination. And maybe I'll just end by speaking a little bit about interpretation and what to do with what you just experienced. So often what we experience in active imagination can, of course, be very symbolic. Those symbols may well have rich personal meaning, but they can certainly also pertain to the collective unconscious and what might be considered more universal meanings or symbolism. And there can be a temptation to really want to analyze the experience. And I suggest that you do analyze them to a degree. I would definitely recommend that you journal the experience, come back to it over the coming days and weeks, maybe even next year or in several years' time, you'll come back and look at the account of what you experienced and you'll uncover new insights, or it will help you put what you were going through at this time in perspective. So certainly I do recommend doing that. And at the same time, what's really important about this is the experience itself. So we're going to be talking more in a future part here about how to record and the various ways of doing that. But for now, let's just leave it there, because I want to just emphasize this point that the experience is where a lot of the work is done. And I think it's fair to say, hyper left brain culture tends to value the result or the product or what we make of something and what sense we can make of it afterwards. Well, curiously, one way to make sense of something is really to experience it. It's actually quite hard to make sense of something fully until we've gone through both, as Ken James said, the emotional and the intellectual side of a thing, of an experience. So whether it's an emotion we're working through, whether it's some kind of insight or piece of shadow material we're working on, we really have to be engaging both sides of these things. But moreover, it's about being with it and letting go of the need to actually record it fully. And what you'll notice is that the more you can let go of the need to really capture it and to write it down with superb accuracy, the more you can actually be with it. So, you don't remember every conversation you've ever had with flesh and bone people out in the real world. You don't remember every dream you've ever had, but guaranteed all of those dreams and all of those conversations have a bearing on who you are today. So it's not really the recording that makes most of the difference. It's in being with it. So you have complete green light to, when you next do an active imagination session, just allow yourself to really fully immerse in it. So with that said, I will thank you for your time and attention, and I look forward to seeing you in part 3. Thank you.